What does a legend wish for? Just weeks before his death, the world of rock has lost its heartbeat. Ozzy Osbourne, the most powerful voice in rock, the godfather of heavy metal, is gone. He took his final breath at 76, and with it, a chapter of music history closed forever. But Ozzy, he was never just a musician. He was a storm, a revolution, a man who turned chaos into a kingdom and ruled it with fire. His passing sent a tidal wave of grief through generations. Fans sobbed, friends stood frozen, and his family? For them, it was as if time stopped cold. But the Prince of Darkness didn't fade quietly. He left like he lived, loud, fearless, unforgettable. In those final weeks, he made a request so raw, so unexpected, even those closest to him didn't see it coming. His soul was clinging to one last dream, and only Sharon, the love of his life, could make it happen. Before we begin, raise your thumb with us, not just as a gesture, but as a tribute, to honor and remember the Prince of Darkness. The house was quiet in those final weeks. A soft breeze rustled through the curtains of their countryside estate, but inside, time seemed to move slower, as if the world was holding its breath. Sharon sat beside him, day after day, her hand gently wrapped around his. Ozzy, once the wildest voice in rock, now spoke in low tones, not because he had nothing to say, but because his body simply couldn't keep up with his thoughts anymore. Parkinson's was merciless. It crept through his body like a thief in the night, robbing him of strength, control, and movement. It was cruel, brutally unfair. The same man who once leapt across stages in a blaze of black leather and lightning riffs now needed help just to sit up. Some days, he could barely lift a spoon. In a rare moment of candor, he once admitted, "The past 4 years have been sheer hell for me. My health has been in a terrible state." Yet even that pain hadn't touched his spirit. His mind, like an old amplifier, still hummed with clarity and power. His wit remained. His timing was perfect. And those eyes still burned with the mischievous spark that once set stadiums ablaze. "This body's broken," he once said with a crooked grin, "but the brain's still partying." Every morning, he asked for tea. Not painkillers, not doctors, just tea and Sharon. They would sit together for hours, sometimes in silence, sometimes lost in time. He drifted freely between decades, his childhood in Aston, the bitter cold, the soot-covered streets, the fights, the hunger. He chuckled at the memory of his first gig, terrified, under-rehearsed, and completely electrified. He spoke fondly of Tony, Geezer, and Bill, the brothers of the storm who helped him birth a genre, and then his voice would falter, grow soft, break a little. He'd speak of his children, Kelly, with her fiery heart, Jack, steady as a rock, Amy, so quietly strong, even the grandkids. "Promise me," he told Sharon one night, voice barely audible, "they'll remember the fire, not the flicker." Sharon bit her lip. She had held this man through addiction, through relapses, through nights of chaos and brilliance. She had seen him destroy himself and build himself back again. But never like this. Never so physically diminished, yet so soulfully alive. The body was quitting, but the man inside was not. Then came the moment she would never forget. It was late June 2025. They sat by the window as dusk settled over the estate. The sky glowed orange. Ozzy stared straight ahead, eyes clearer than they had been in weeks. He turned slowly to her and whispered, "I don't want them to remember a man in a wheelchair. I don't want to be their sadness. I want to give them one last roar, where it all began." It wasn't just a request. It was a plea, a vow, a final act of rebellion from a man who had spent his life defying gravity. Sharon didn't cry. Not then. She simply nodded. She had one job now, to turn that dying wish into something immortal. The next morning, she started making calls. Quiet ones, strategic ones. Ozzy could barely stand, let alone tour. But maybe, just maybe, for one night, in one place, she could give him back his fire. Could a broken body still command a stage? Could the Prince of Darkness rise again, one final time? She didn't know, but she was going to find out. Because behind the failing body was still Ozzy, still fire, still thunder, and his final dream was now hers to carry. For over 4 decades, Sharon Osbourne had been more than a wife. She was Ozzy's fiercest protector, his steadiest anchor, the architect behind his second act, and the sole witness to every storm and resurrection. She'd stood by him through hospital corridors that smelled like bleach and desperation, through interventions that blurred into tears, through screaming matches, relapse nightmares, and glorious comebacks. Ozzy was chaos. Sharon was steel. But now, for the first time, the roles reversed. It was her chaos to face, and her mission to turn one whispered dream into a breathtaking farewell. She didn't tell anyone, not even the children. She held it close, like a secret flame she had to shield from the wind. Doctors said it was impossible. Friends called it dangerous. Even Ozzy, in moments of doubt, begged her to forget it. "I'm done, Sharon. Don't make me a fool," he rasped one night. But she only shook her head. "You're not done. Not until the music stops." Behind closed doors, she pushed harder than ever. She negotiated with managers, coordinated with producers, and fought tooth and nail with medical staff to approve one night, just one, under strict supervision. Every step forward was a battle. But Sharon never flinched. She believed in the power of that moment, the catharsis it could bring, not just for Ozzy, but for everyone who had ever loved him. She wasn't just honoring a final wish. She was carrying out his dying will. She was giving breath to the only thing he had left to say, not in words, but in song. When Ozzy could no longer walk without pain, she helped him rehearse in whispers. When his lungs struggled, she reminded him, "You still have a voice, even if it cracks." And when the tremors in his hands made holding a microphone feel like lifting stone, she wrapped her hands around his and said, "Let the world hear your goodbye." In those silent nights, while the world slept, Sharon was awake, calling doctors in LA, coordinating set lists, begging for permission from specialists who warned her it might kill him. But Ozzy was already dying. What mattered more was how he would leave, not in silence, not in a hospital bed, but as a performer, as a legend. And Sharon understood that with every beat of her breaking heart. Because for Sharon, this wasn't just about Ozzy performing one last time. It was about giving a dying man the dignity to choose his ending. It was about letting him burn bright one final time, even if it meant using the last of his light. It was about giving the world back their Prince of Darkness, not as a patient, not as a ghost of who he once was, but as a storm that could still shake the heavens. She reassembled his old crew. She chose the stadium. She handled every camera angle, every firework, every second of that night with the precision of a general and the heart of a grieving wife. And she kept it a secret, not because it was a surprise, but because it was sacred. Her final gift wasn't just a concert. It was a resurrection, a goodbye wrapped in thunder, a requiem of power and pain, And when she finally stood before him, days before the show, holding the full plan in trembling hands, her voice didn't break. "It's happening. July 5th. Birmingham. Your night. Your roar. One last time. Ozzy." And in his weary eyes, through the veil of exhaustion and years of agony, there was a flicker of something almost holy. A man ready to die, but only after singing his soul out one last time. But to understand why that final performance mattered so deeply, you have to go back. Back to where it all started. Because Ozzy Osbourne's final wish wasn't just about singing. It was about reclaiming a life that had once been broken and rewriting its final verse with triumph. His story, raw, brutal, and defiant, was never about fame. It was about survival through sound. Born as John Michael Osbourne on December 3, 1948, in Aston, a tough, working-class neighborhood of Birmingham, Ozzy grew up surrounded by poverty, soot, and the relentless clang of factories. His home had no luxuries. His family scraped by. At school, he struggled, not just with academics, but with bullying, self-worth, and an undiagnosed dyslexia that left him feeling lost. At 17, he found himself behind bars for burglary, sleeping on concrete floors, believing he had no future. Society had all but written him off, and yet, in the middle of all that darkness, he heard music. He didn't just hear it, he clung to it like a lifeline. Music wasn't an escape, it was oxygen. Then came 1968. With Tony Iommi, Geezer Butler, and Bill Ward, Ozzy formed Black Sabbath, a band that would not just change music, but history. Their debut album in 1970 sounded like nothing else before. Heavy, ominous, primal. Critics dismissed it, but the youth of a disillusioned generation heard something real. The pain, the chaos, the raw truth in Ozzy's voice gave heavy metal its soul. Sabbath wasn't just a band, it was a voice for the outcasts, the broken, the misunderstood. And Ozzy? He became their prophet. Paranoid, War Pigs, Iron Man? These weren't just songs, they were battle cries for kids who felt invisible. But even as he soared, the chaos within Ozzy never truly quieted. His demons chased him, clawed at his fame. By 1979, he was fired from Sabbath for substance abuse and erratic behavior. Most thought that was the end, but Ozzy had a way of rewriting endings. In 1980, with the help of Randy Rhoads and a new band, he released Blizzard of Oz, an album that didn't just save his career, it transformed him into a solo legend. Crazy Train became an anthem. Mr. Crowley, a Gothic masterpiece. Diary of a Madman proved that he wasn't just surviving, he was dominating. His voice, unlike any other in rock, carried both madness and melody, anguish and awe. He toured relentlessly. He stumbled, he relapsed, he broke down and got back up. And always, the music was there. In 1991, No More Tears reminded the world of his lyrical depth and vocal power. In 1992, Mama, I'm Coming Home became one of the most heartfelt ballads in metal history. A love letter not just to Sharon, but to the idea of redemption. He won Grammys. He was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, both with Sabbath and as a solo artist. He earned a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame and another in Birmingham, the city that had once forgotten him. But Ozzy's influence didn't stop at music. In 2002, MTV's The Osbournes introduced him to a whole new generation. With Sharon, Jack, and Kelly, he let the world into their home, unfiltered, chaotic, and strangely relatable. Viewers saw not just the Prince of Darkness, but a forgetful, funny, tender father who stumbled through domestic life. It was raw. It was hilarious. It was revolutionary. Ozzy became more than a rock star. He became a cultural icon. And through all of it, the awards, the accolades, the headlines, one thing remained constant. He never stopped singing. Not after the falls, the surgeries, the tremors, the diagnosis. Not even after he publicly revealed his battle with Parkinson's in 2020. The past 4 years have been sheer hell for me. My health has been in a terrible state, he said in a deeply honest interview. But even then, he didn't stop. In 2022, he released Patient Number 9, proving once again that he could still dominate charts and hearts. Ozzy Osbourne's legacy isn't just in his records. It's in the millions of misfits he gave hope to. It's in every kid who felt unseen and heard their rage and sorrow in his scream. It's in the generations of musicians who owe their sound, their fire, their rebellion to the man from Birmingham who refused to go quietly. His music didn't just entertain, it rescued, it empowered, it endured. That's why, when he asked Sharon for one final performance, it wasn't just nostalgia. It was a sacred ritual. It was the final beat of a heart that had roared through 5 decades. It was a man who had given everything to the stage, asking just once more to let the stage give something back. And when that night finally came and 40,000 fans raised their hands in the air, when the first chords of "Mama, I'm Coming Home" echoed across Villa Park, it wasn't just music. It was history. It was legacy. It was the final note of a life that had turned pain into power, noise into meaning, and metal into something immortal. As the world unknowingly approached Ozzy Osbourne's final curtain, one city stood at the center of it all. Not New York, not Los Angeles, but Birmingham. His hometown, his birthplace, and the cradle of heavy metal. Birmingham didn't just remember Ozzy, it embraced him. It opened its arms, its streets, and its soul to give him the kind of farewell only a city can give its most legendary son. They called it the Summer of Sabbath, a sweeping, months-long tribute that transformed the industrial city into a living monument to its most iconic voice. From May to July 2025, Birmingham pulsed with music, murals, and memories. Ozzy wasn't just celebrated, he was sanctified. The tributes were everywhere. Banners of Ozzy's face fluttered from lampposts. Murals covered entire buildings, capturing his onstage fire and offstage charm. But one act, one gesture, towered above the rest. The renaming of one of the city's central bridges to the Osbourne Bridge. It wasn't just a bridge anymore. It was a passageway between past and future, between a troubled boy from Aston and the immortal icon he became. There, beneath the newly unveiled sign, fans gathered, snapping photos, lighting candles, leaving handwritten letters. A nearby bronze statue, sculpted with painstaking detail, captured Ozzy mid-performance, mouth open in defiance, hands raised in triumph. This wasn't just a tribute. It was a city's reckoning with its own history. Birmingham had once been a place Ozzy ran from, a town that didn't understand him, that branded him a delinquent, a dropout. But now, in his final weeks, it was the city that rose up to hold him, honor him, and, unknowingly, prepare to mourn him. Local radio stations played Sabbath classics daily. Schools introduced music programs that studied his work. Even city buses flashed, "Thank you, Ozzy," across their LED signs. And then came the fans. They arrived in waves, from across the UK, from the US, from South America, from Europe. Some drove for days. Others flew thousands of miles. They came with tattoos, with vinyl records, with leather jackets covered in patches. Elderly fans leaned on canes, holding original pressings of Paranoid. Teenagers wore freshly inked Crazy Train lyrics down their arms. Families arrived in Ozzy t-shirts, 3 generations standing shoulder to shoulder, some of them crying before they even reached the concert gates. Villa Park, the sacred ground chosen for the farewell concert, became a pilgrimage site. And yet, despite the banners, the music, the fanfare, no one truly knew what was coming. Sharon, ever silent, never let on that this wasn't just a celebration. It was a goodbye. Those close to the family knew something was different. Ozzy had grown quieter in interviews. His movements were slower. His smile was still there, but behind it, a shadow loomed. And so, Birmingham, in all its splendor and noise, was unknowingly preparing itself not just for a concert, but for a eulogy. What made it even more heart-wrenching was the innocence in the joy. Children danced to songs they barely understood. Couples held each other tightly as "Mama, I'm Coming Home" played from nearby cafes. Strangers shared Ozzy stories in pubs, on buses, on sidewalks. It was a city soaked in music, nostalgia, and hope. A hope that maybe, just maybe, the Prince of Darkness would roar once more and keep on roaring. But storms often follow sunsets, and this one was no exception. The summer of Sabbath would soon be remembered not only as a tribute, but as a prophecy, a beautiful calm before the unthinkable. And when the time came, just 17 days after that unforgettable night at Villa Park, Birmingham would not only grieve, it would rise as the eternal keeper of Ozzy's flame. Because for all the places he conquered, all the stages he ruled, and all the hearts he broke, only one place ever truly knew him: Birmingham. It was more than a concert. It was the last heartbeat of a legend. On July 5, 2025, under the glowing lights of Villa Park, 40,000 souls gathered to witness a moment no one would ever forget. The world had watched Ozzy Osbourne fight through pain, sickness, and time itself. And now they would watch him come home. Sharon Osbourne, more than a wife, more than a manager, became the architect of a miracle. She had done the impossible. Behind the scenes, she reunited Black Sabbath for the first time in 2 decades, gathering the very brothers with whom Ozzy had started the revolution: Tony Iommi, Geezer Butler, and Bill Ward. But that was just the beginning. Sharon summoned the greatest names in rock history: Metallica, Guns N' Roses, Judas Priest, and Anthrax. Bands that had all walked through doors Ozzy helped build. It was called the Back to the Beginning concert, but in truth, it was something far greater: a living requiem, a final act scripted by destiny and delivered by love. Fans flew in from every continent, waving banners, clutching records, wearing shirts that said, "Thank you, Ozzy." The live stream reached millions across the globe, but in that stadium, time seemed to stop. And then, in a moment that burned itself into history, Ozzy appeared. Not walking, not standing, but seated proudly on a black steel throne, rolled onto the stage like a king returning to his realm. The crowd erupted, a mix of thunder and tears, as the Prince of Darkness lifted the microphone one last time. He opened with, "Mama, I'm coming home." His voice, though weathered, cracked through the air like lightning. Each lyric a goodbye, each note a wound reopened. And then he delivered what would become the final anthem of his life: Crazy Train. The opening riff sent shivers. The crowd screamed, and Ozzy smiled, a small, knowing smile that said, "This is where I belong." No grand speech, no long farewell, just a nod, just tears, just a shared silence. And finally, fireworks lit the sky, not as a celebration, but as a salute. It wasn't just a concert. It was a farewell carved in steel and sound, forged in memory and music. Sharon had given Ozzy the one thing no doctor, no cure, no miracle could: a final moment of truth. For a man who once sang about madness, pain, and redemption, this stage was his altar. This night, his absolution. And as the sparks rained down from the heavens, his eyes locked with Sharon's, as if to say, "I'm home. I'm free." On July 22nd, 2025, just 17 days after the Back to the Beginning concert that shook the world, Ozzy Osbourne took his final breath. The man who had electrified generations, defied death time and again, and transformed chaos into legend, was gone. But he did not slip away in darkness. He left as he had lived, on his own terms, with the roar of applause still echoing through time. At his bedside were the people who knew him not as the Prince of Darkness, but as Dad, as husband, as simply Ozzy. Sharon sat quietly, her hand never leaving his. Beside her were their children, Jack, Kelly, Amy. The room was still. No dramatic farewells, no wails of despair, just silent tears, intertwined fingers, and a shared knowing that he had finally found peace. "He looked at me one last time," Sharon would later recall, her voice cracking, "and I knew." He didn't need to say anything. I could see it in his eyes. He was ready. The world, however, was not. When the news broke that morning, shockwaves rippled across the globe. From Tokyo to Toronto, millions paused, stunned. Social media was instantly flooded with messages, memories, and tributes. The hashtag #sign Thank You Ozzy surged to the top in over 60 countries. It was more than a trend. It was a tidal wave of grief and gratitude. Fans lit candles, played his records at full volume, and even gathered in spontaneous vigils outside venues where he had once performed. For many, it felt like losing a piece of their youth, their rebellion, their identity. Sir Elton John was among the first to react, posting a black-and-white photo of him and Ozzy backstage in the 80s. He was a force of nature, a dear friend, a rebel poet in leather and eyeliner. "The world feels colder today," he wrote. Rod Stewart called him the loudest soul with the kindest heart. Paul McCartney paid tribute with a simple but poignant message. "Legends don't die, they echo. Ozzy, your echo will never fade." Tony Iommi, his bandmate and brother-in-arms through decades of thunder and fire, posted a photo from their last rehearsal together. "I just can't believe it," he wrote. "My dear, dear friend Ozzy is gone. The laughter, the madness, the music. We shared a lifetime. There will never be another." Rock and Roll Hall of Fame released a full-length tribute video, chronicling Ozzy's journey from Birmingham's back streets to the global stage. BBC Radio played a special 10-hour marathon of his greatest hits, interspersed with interview clips and fan messages. ITV interrupted its primetime schedule for a breaking segment titled, "The World Mourns a Legend." Candlelight projections of Ozzy's silhouette were cast onto London's Tower Bridge and Birmingham's Symphony Hall. Across the ocean, Times Square lit up with a massive tribute screen, flashing his image and the words, "Thank you, Ozzy." In cities around the world, people came together to mourn. In São Paulo, fans formed a 1,000-person choir to sing "Mama, I'm Coming," home in Portuguese. In Los Angeles, Sunset Boulevard was closed off as thousands gathered for an impromptu candlelight vigil. In Tokyo, a massive digital billboard in Shibuya displayed his name above images of his iconic stage moments. Even in war-torn regions, makeshift gatherings were held in underground spaces, proving that Ozzy's voice had transcended borders, languages, and politics. His music had been a lifeline for the misunderstood, the lost, the rebellious. And now, they were all coming back to say goodbye. But perhaps the most haunting tribute came from Sharon herself. In a televised interview 3 days after his passing, she sat beneath a soft light, holding the same wedding ring Ozzy had slipped on her finger over 4 decades ago. Her words were few, but every syllable trembled with heartbreak and pride. He didn't just want to live forever. He wanted to matter forever. And he does. She paused, held back tears, then added, "He gave everything, even when he had nothing left to give." In that moment, the world understood. Ozzy's death wasn't the end of a story. It was the final verse of a ballad that would echo for eternity. The tremble in Sharon's voice became the tremble in millions of hearts. The world hadn't just lost a rock star. It had lost a symbol of endurance, of raw humanity wrapped in spikes and eyeliner, of a man who never let the darkness devour him completely. Memorial concerts were announced worldwide, with artists from every generation pledging to honor Ozzy's legacy. Metallica announced they would rename their upcoming world tour the Crazy Train Legacy Tour. Bruce Dickinson of Iron Maiden declared a tribute album featuring rock legends covering Ozzy's most iconic tracks. The Vatican, in an unprecedented move, issued a statement acknowledging his impact on generations. Though his methods were unconventional, his passion touched the soul of humanity. As of now, plans for Ozzy's funeral are still being finalized. A private ceremony for family and close friends is expected, followed by a global live-streamed tribute in Birmingham. Sharon has asked for fans to light candles wherever they are and play his music loud. "He would have wanted that," she said, "not silence. Volume. And still, he isn't gone. His music plays on. His image lives on. His influence bleeds into every riff, every scream, every broken rule. Ozzy Osbourne may have departed this world, but he has become eternal." As the final notes fade, one truth remains undeniable. He didn't leave in silence. He left in thunder. The concert at Villa Park was no longer just a charity show. It was the realization of a final, deeply personal wish. Ozzy Osbourne's ultimate dream before leaving this world. It was Sharon who made it happen. In the face of impossible odds, she moved mountains, reuniting legendary bandmates, assembling global rock royalty, and standing firm against medical doubts to give her husband the one thing he longed for most. One last performance in the city that made him, surrounded by the people who loved him. It was not about raising money. It was about raising hearts, lifting memories, and honoring a man who had lived and breathed music until his very last breath. Sharon Osbourne, in silence and strength, made sure Ozzy didn't leave this world as a frail patient. She ensured he left it as the artist he always was. She did not just carry out a wish. She fulfilled a legacy, protected a flame, and helped a man die with his soul at peace. As the stage lights dimmed, he was not diminished. He had been transformed. Ozzy may no longer sing, but his voice echoes louder than ever, in stadiums, in headphones, in the millions of hearts that are still screaming his name. His last whisper, his ultimate wish, became reality. His life was wild, reckless, legendary, but the end was quiet, dignified, and full of grace. A final bow from the Prince of Darkness, who turned chaos into an empire, and pain into power. His legacy isn't just about music. It's about resilience, about passion that burns even when the body fails, about love, pure, hard-earned, and unwavering. Thank you for staying with us through this journey. If you're still watching, perhaps somewhere out there, someone watching this has faced loss. Maybe you've known the deep, unspeakable silence that follows when a loved one departs. Maybe, like Sharon, you've held a hand through the final hours. Maybe, like Ozzy, you've clung to one last dream. To you, we send strength. Life is unfair. It hurts. And death always feels too soon. But perhaps, if there is any comfort, it's that goodbyes, when done with love, can be beautiful. Let us all whisper one last time together. Thank you, Ozzy. May the next world be kinder to you than this one. May your soul finally rest, free of pain, and may your spirit scream louder than ever. Rest in power, Ozzy Osbourne. We will love you forever.